Hey guys, welcome to this week's show. Got a whole bunch of cool stuff to talk about, and later on, Steve from HD Retrovision is joining us. He's actually a huge retro nerd and has contributed a ton to the community, so this is going to be a fun interview to talk with him about stuff, and we're not just going to be talking about his cables, we're actually mostly going to be talking about a bunch of other things that we've been working on together, things that are already up on the site, things that are coming up soon, so I really think everybody's going to be interested, and I hope everybody sticks around to listen. But let's jump right into it. Artemio has released a new version of the 240p test suite with a couple of new features like a vertical scroll test, updated lag testing, and then he added an audio beep to the manual lag test. So it's a basic update, it's nothing major, but as always, it's just an incredible piece of software, and anybody that uses retro consoles and RGB monitors or upscalers really should at least try it out at one point or another, just to make sure they can keep their equipment calibrated and kind of check all the different features. And it's always a really cool thing to see, and I hope he keeps doing it and keeps putting new updates out there. Crix recently posted a picture to Twitter showing his GBA EverDrive in its shell. So he's been posting a few things on Twitter and the forums here and there the past few months, and it looks like it's pretty much done. So I'm assuming it's going to go into production and be available to purchase within a few months, maybe less. I haven't heard anything from him at all, but I'll post back when there's an official release date. But I'm pretty excited. It's nice to finally have a GBA ROM cart that I could just dump the whole ROM library on it and not have to worry about anything. A lot of people have told me the Easy Flash 4 is good, but I used an old version of it that I didn't like at all. I guess it's great now, but I would just rather wait for Crix to come out with his and kind of check that one out. But as soon as there's any solid info, I'll definitely post immediately on Twitter and Facebook for if there's a pre-order or anything coming up. There was a pretty heated discussion on the Atari Age forums about whether FPGA emulation is emulation or not. It was very technical and very detailed, and I'll leave a link for anybody that wants to read through, but I found it pretty fascinating, so I wanted to just skip to the end and give the basic synopsis of it, which is an FPGA is a programmable chip that's meant to work exactly like another chip. So while I guess it's emulation, you're actually just mimicking the exact functions of a different chip. Whereas a software emulator, like something you would put on your cell phone or computer or the Retron 5, that's software that's mimicking an entire system running on other layers of software. So they're two completely different things, and so I guess technically it still is, but if done right, it's pretty much imperceptible. And Kevin's Zimba 3000 actually even works with light gun games on the NES, so I mean you're emulating that pretty exact then. So that's those FPGAs that he's used. He's actually reverse engineering it himself to make sure that everything is pretty much flawless. So I'll leave the links if everybody wants to read through. I thought it was pretty interesting though. The latest version of the N64 RGB board was released, both with the fine pitch adapter and with the ability to turn off the blur feature of the N64. And from the diagram it looks like you could actually set it to auto or manual, and I'm not really sure exactly how that's going to work yet, but as soon as I get more details I'll update it. But it's cool that they're in stock and that Tim's keeping up with this, and as soon as I have more info on it and hopefully a demo, I'll report right back with that. A replacement stand for the Virtual Boy was just released. It costs $30, which is a pretty decent price when you consider how expensive most of the real Virtual Boy parts have been going for lately. I was lucky enough to get mine a few years ago for a very good price, because the actual piece that goes into the Virtual Boy in the stand was broken. So I ended up just epoxying mine to it, and it's solid. This thing's never moving. To be honest, I really wish I had a real replacement stand so I don't have to make any permanent change like epoxy, but it's cool that they have that option now. I kind of wish that somebody would finally make that head-mounted visor thing, though, so I wouldn't have to creepily lean into this every time I went to use my Virtual Boy. Since we're already talking about failed Nintendo products, it's kind of funny that the Power Glove was in the news last week a few times. First, Ben Heck posted a video on his site about different ways he could use it for other projects, and then another group of people actually used it to power drones. I had one a few years ago that I had to try for myself that I thought was really terrible, but I do actually have two Power Gloves that are useful. Both are oven mitts. This one's actually rubber and made to look pretty much just like it, but it doesn't fit my hand. And then this one, neatly called the Power Mitt, does kind of fit. I'm just gonna... So, yeah, the most useful Power Gloves I've ever seen are just oven mitts. Last week I updated the PlayStation page on the website with information on Sync on Green for PlayStation 2. So the short version is Sync on Green is a different way of getting 480p out on your PlayStation 2. I actually tried this a few years ago when I was first talking with Futta about it, and then I kind of let it fall to the wayside because the PlayStation 2 isn't my favorite system and there was just so much work I had to do on other pages for other consoles. But then PhoneDork kept bringing it up in conversation, and he kept reminding me about the noisy component video encoder inside the PlayStation 2. So I finally went back, updated the page with info, and then posted a pretty detailed video on how to do it. But the short version is, no matter what, an RGB SCART cable is going to get your best output for 240p and 480i on PlayStation 2. But if you have the right equipment, or if you're willing to buy maybe an extra piece or two of equipment, you could use that same cable to also get a great 480p output. If not, you have to use the component video cables, which aren't bad. It's not like using composite video versus RGB. It's just not quite as good. So if you have a PS2 and you're interested in that, I would definitely check out the page and the video. Tim Worthington just listed the AV driver on his store as well. The AV driver is an audio and video amplifier that he designed a few years ago that's been passed around to different developers for testing. It was originally designed for the PC Engine because that didn't have a native RGB amp in it. But it could be used with pretty much any system as long as you either know how to take the measurements yourself or somebody else already has and you could just set the jumpers on it. This is something that I really want to dig into in the future. I've had one for a while and it's worked great for me. And as long as the documentation comes together pretty well, I think it'll be a really cool thing for a lot of people to use. So I'll keep everybody updated on it, and I'll post pictures and a page of any installs that I use it on. And for the last piece of news, the G-SCART switch was put up for pre-order again this week. And then it was taken down, and then it was put up again. So let me explain what happened. So Super G is doing all this himself from now on. I really don't have anything to do with it other than promoting it because I think it's awesome. And he opened up a PayPal account for this and started selling them, and then PayPal flagged his account once it got past a certain point, which I actually think is totally understandable and cool. They don't want to have anybody pull a scam or anything, so they just kind of paused his account for a few days just to, ask him why all the money was coming in, what he's using it for, and just verify that he was an actual seller. And then once it got cleared up, it went right back up for sale. So the plan is now that he's just going to leave that up for probably a few more weeks, see how many pre-orders he gets, put it on hold again while he places another order, and then immediately open it right back up again. So basically just, let the money come in till he has enough to place a big order, and then keep letting them, the orders come back in to know how much to order for the next time. So unfortunately, this is kind of what you get when you have hobby projects, because, he's not a big company. He can't just lay out $100,000 to make a ton of switches and then, hope that he sells them all. So you got to be a little bit patient with it, but overall it's pretty good. Both switches, both the JP21 and then the SCART version are available, and they're both $225, which is $10 more than last time, but it comes with a power supply that costs $10, so it's kind of the same cost to the end consumer. Now on to the Q&A stuff. Since we were just talking about it, and since it had the most comments, I figured we might as well start with the G-SCART switch. A lot of people, I think, maybe misunderstood kind of how things are working with this. So, I guess to break it down, there's two types of general projects that you see in the retro gaming community. There are people that release their products for free as open source, and there's a ton of these, and they're amazing. I mean, we as a community are able to do so much awesome stuff with our consoles that we would have never been able to do without this stuff. And generally speaking, the developers release it and they help support it, but they leave it up to the public to kind of get it made and develop, and that's awesome. That's great, and that way they could walk away at any time. There's no obligation. But what Super G is doing is the exact opposite. So he designed it himself, he's dealing with manufacturing, he had to deal with all of the costs of prototyping, and then now he's shipping it himself and dealing with all support himself as well. So this is kind of the opposite. This is not something that you'd put all this hours and effort and money into and then just give away. Also, it's not really fair to ask for somebody who spent that many hours to just kind of release it. I guess if he ever got bored of selling it and, said, oh, I'm tired of it, yeah, I'm sure he'd probably release it open source. But this is something that he's still doing as an active hobby. And the cost, I think, was something else that people kind of balked at. But I think to tie in with the other comment is you just got to understand about the hours spent and about the money being made. So he's not making $1 million on these things. And a lot of people don't seem to understand the costs involved in making a product. And I don't mean that in a nasty way, because if you've never tried to develop or release a product, you wouldn't know. So it's not like I'm not accusing people of doing, of being mean. I think it's just accidental ignorance. So, if you have a product that costs you $10 in parts and you sell it for $20, you're not making a $10 profit, not even close. There's so many little hidden fees here and there between taxes and shipping and supplies where your margins have to be huge for any actual bottom line dollar. So yeah, $225 is really expensive for anything, but he's not making much because the total cost for him is still pretty high. Hopefully if we get enough pre-orders in, he'll be able to lower the costs eventually, but that's kind of a ways off. And also, it's the amount of hours and money he's put into this need to be factored as well. So, I guess the analogy I like to use is if you count how many hours he spent from day one till now and how much money he's made, I guarantee you he can go get a minimum wage job making the lowest amount of money possible and end up having to make more money with the same amount of hours spent. So please keep that in consideration when you guys put your comments up. I think, without exaggerating, I would say 99% of the people were just amazing and supportive and awesome, and it's so appreciative. But for the people that weren't, I understand that a lot of people don't get it, so that's fine. They didn't mean to post negative stuff. But there's just so much more that goes into it that most people don't even know about. So yeah, it's really expensive, but not because he's ripping people off. I mean, I guess kind of that was a 3.5-minute way of saying that one statement. So I hope I didn't ramble too much. I just really wanted everybody to understand what goes into it and why you're not going to find the G-SCART switch being open source anytime soon, whereas other products you might. So I hope that answers the question, and if you guys disagree or if I forgot to mention anything, please just put that in the comments. Next question. Lou Billy asked if there's any differences between an arcade monitor and a professional PVM. Yeah, big differences. Arcade monitors were designed just for that, and while they look awesome and certainly way better than a consumer-grade CRT, the professional monitors were designed for things like broadcasts, video editing, and then medical imaging, so they're way higher level. And don't forget the cost, too. So I guess arcade monitors were about $1,000, whereas, a lower-end PVM was $5,500. And the 32-inch PVM I have was $22,000 when it was new in, I think, 2003. And I have another PVM that in 2007 was $28,000. So, I mean, literally 28 times the cost of it. Of course, it's going to be way higher quality. So it was a really good question, but I guess the shorter answer is the arcade monitors still look great, but a BVM or a PVM is always going to look a lot better. Then last question, Tarantula's asked if I'm going to separate the interviews from the roundups. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what to do with that. So I have some interviews that tied directly in with what we're talking about during the week, and others that are just separate interviews with really cool people that I kind of want to introduce to the rest of the world, I guess. So I'm not really sure how to handle that. I thought of separating them and doing an interview series, but, what if we do an interview and all we talk about is the news that week? So maybe I'll do both. Maybe I'll separate the interviews for the ones that are standalone. But I actually was really hoping to get everybody else's feedback on that. So if you want to leave any comments, send me an email, whatever. Maybe I'll do a Facebook and a Twitter poll too at some point. But yeah, I guess I want to do whatever you guys want me to do. So let me know, and whatever the majority wants, I'll make sure to make it work for everybody. So thanks for the comment. Up next, we have a pretty cool interview. But first, I just gotta say, don't worry, this isn't like a sales pitch or anything. Ste is a huge retro nerd. He contributes a ton to the retro gaming scene. And we're going to be talking about stuff that I think most people that listen to the podcast would really be interested in, because it kind of applies to all of us and the different things we do. And we cover a lot of ground, and I had a blast doing it, of course. But I just kind of wanted to give a little background about them and about how we met, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about them. And I think the biggest misconception is simply that the name of their company is called HD Retrovision. I think when they first came out, a lot of people thought they were trying to mislead people into buying their cables thinking they were making it HD. And I think a lot of other people thought maybe they just jammed an RGB to component converter in a cable and walked away, and that was that. And both of those things couldn't be farther from the truth. First of all, their cables have a tremendous amount of research and development put into them, and they're really just very, very high quality. And second, I mean, they're two really cool guys. I liked them both, but I actually almost didn't even meet them at all. So, kind of a funny story. I know Chris, who's the owner of Retro Games Plus, a chain of retro gaming stores around the Connecticut area. And he introduced me to Lance Cortez, who runs, I think he works on RetroWare TV and helps run the Retro Gaming Expo in Connecticut. And Lance asked me if I wanted to be on an RGB panel with the guys from HD Retrovision. And I said, look, I gotta be honest, I don't know these guys at all. I don't know what they're about. I really wouldn't be comfortable doing it. I mean, how do I know these guys aren't just gonna show up and, spend an hour pitching their cables? And Lance convinced me, well, look, let's just have a phone call. We'll all get on a conference call and kind of see where we're all at together. So I agreed, and 2 minutes into the conversation, it was just completely obvious that these guys were very cool. This was not going to be a sales pitch. All they wanted to do was have fun and, check out some retro gaming stuff. And yeah, of course, show off their cables, but not the focus of it. And we did the panel, which I'll put a link to. It was pretty successful. A lot of cool questions. A lot of people showed up. And they did a great job. I mean, it was all just about RGB and video signals. And yeah, they touched upon their cables, but it wasn't the focus. So afterwards, we kind of grabbed lunch and hung out. And I became friends with Ste after that. Talked to him all the time. And I'm really happy to have him on, and I hope at least people have listened up to this part and understand that, please ignore a lot of the misconceptions on the forums. Please ignore all of the forum trolls, always. And just give him a chance, because he's just contributed a ton to the scene, and this has been a blast having him on the interview. So, yeah, hope you enjoy it. Hey, what's up, man? I'm here with Steve from HD Retrovision. How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
I'm
Yeah,
armed with my Trooper beer, ready to go here. Hopefully, have some fun stuff to talk about and enjoy a beer while we're at it.
I Coke Zero, and I drank a White Monster before this as well.
What's a
So I
white
might have to
monster?
pee at some point.
What's a white monster? Is that like another Red Bull or?
It's Monster Energy Absolute Zero or something.
Yeah,
I think it's the best tasting one. It's probably the worst one for you, but
yeah. I discovered the blue one on a business trip once. I had to. It was one of those things where my boss was like, "Yeah, fly in on Monday. You probably only need to do like a half day, and then just make sure you stay in the area, have fun." We showed up, no work was done, and the place was opening that Friday, so
oh,
we worked 6 a.m. to midnight. 4 days in a row.
that,
That Blue Monster kept me alive. It's one of the worst business trips ever.
they call that sleep replacement. I
Ugh,
gotta buy some sleep replacement. Buy a case. They sell them in cases now, like a 10. Ugh.
jeez, this stuff gives me
Well,
jitters.
yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks for coming on, and I want to pick your brain about pretty much everything that we've been emailing about, because I feel like, I almost want to start a public forum just on some of the crap that we've talked about, because it's been so interesting. So,
Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. So, yeah, whatever you want to talk about.
cool. Well, I guess the first thing, just because it's relevant to what I posted last week, so you did work with the My Life in Gaming guys about the capacitors in PS2 and PS1 cables.
Right.
And I got the basic idea of that. And so I guess if you want to take out a scope and get the perfect signal, there's one set of capacitors that's best for the PS1, another set that's best for the PS2, and then one that'll work pretty much perfect with both. Is that true?
So I guess if you step back a bit, if you look at what the official Sony cables did between the two, you kind of get a better idea of what's going on.
Hmm.
So, in PS1s, there weren't any capacitors on the main board. They were in the cable assembly, the official Sony RGB SCART cable assembly.
Hmm.
There were 470 microfarad capacitors, and so that was meant to work with the PS1. In PS2, because the component and the RGB are shared and it's able to be switched via software, they put the capacitors on the main board of the PS2s and the PS3s. So if you hook up a PS1 cable into a PS2, the capacitors on the main board add with the capacitors in the cable. And if you put series capacitors in series, you reduce the total capacitance, and you don't want to do that. There's a reason why like 220 is used mostly. That's the minimum you could get away with to avoid a type of distortion called field tilt and line tilt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the minimum you can get away with without having it look bad subjectively. 470 is common. You see 470 a lot. I think in PS3s they use 470. Don't quote me on that. I have way too many schematics floating around in my head. I could be wrong. But the gist of it is, so the PS2 SCART cables had no capacitors in them.
Okay.
So it wouldn't reduce the capacitors that were on the main board. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And so what I was suggesting was, I think it's impractical to have two different types because all the connectors are the same. I think you can make one with a large enough capacitance, like maybe 1,000 microfarad, such that when you use it on a PS1, you get equivalent of 1,000 because that's all that's in the cable. But when you use it in a PS2 or PS3, the reduction in capacitance, when stuff adds in series, it's like adding resistors in parallel. It's the same effect. Right. That effect gets reduced, and you don't cause any of the added distortion or noticeable distortion. That's my opinion. That's what I got from it. I sent them like a test fixture. I sent Try a different test fixture with different capacitor banks that you could plug in and see stuff. And I had some purposely low ones, so you could see what it looks like when it's way too low, like 10 microfarads.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, let me grab that real quick. All right, I just paused it to get it. So here's the contraption that you made. So basically, you'll have the standard PlayStation AV cable, and then I guess you have the different types of capacitors that could be used in each one. So if I wanted to try out the bigger ones, which I guess...
God, I don't remember what I put on there. It's just so long ago.
Yeah.
Was it is it 1,000? It might be 1,000.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And then you have the output cable that just goes right to RGB SCART. So this is pretty cool. I haven't had a chance to test this yet.
I think it might be reversed. I think the PlayStation goes on the other end.
You're right.
Yeah. But yeah, it's if they weren't electrolytic caps, they wouldn't matter. But yeah, you want to put the PlayStation on the other end that has just a single connector.
Yes, gotcha. Okay, so I will be testing this soon, and I'm gonna kind of update the PlayStation section of my site with this because I see you also included one for Super Nintendo. That's neat. I'll be able to try that as well.
Yeah, and I think that one I might have put a switch in the connector. Is there a switch on that SNES connector?
Yes, yes, it is.
I forgot what that's for. I think it's to change the sync.
Probably, I would assume, yeah, between composite and composite sync and composite video. But
I think yeah, because Try only had a N64 modded, but didn't have the composite sync, so I rigged that up too. So just so we could try, like this issue isn't really affecting that console, but the thing about this distortion depends on signal content. So depending on what's happening on the screen is where you get this type of distortion.
See, I've had a ton of trouble with PlayStation cables, and I probably get at least one email a week from people that are also having trouble. And a lot of them are just cheaply made cables. There was one with a weird ground loop issue because it had like the RCA connectors, like the little breakout box in the cable itself. And there was even one I was testing with the Sync on Green that seemed to be wired okay, and I'd added a sync stripper in it because at the time I was using a switch that needed one, just the basic LM1881 circuit. And whenever I try to enable, excuse me, Sync on Green, it won't sync with my Extron RXI box. Everything starts to go crazy. And I don't know if it's the capacitance, if it's the sync strippers too close, so there's just so many issues. So I want to try that. I want to see how the different capacitors affect sync on green, if at all. I imagine it would have something to do with it, because if you're adding capacitance on a line that's carrying both green and a sync signal, that might mess with something, right?
It could, but usually the distortion caused by the capacitance that's related to how much capacitance you have is mainly a black level shift.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you get some like sync distortion if you change rapidly, maybe from black to white. But I don't know. I don't feel like that is the issue. I'm not sure though.
So if people have PlayStation cables now and they're not really having any issues with them, and they're definitely using it between PlayStation 1 and 2, is it worth popping open to see what's in there? Just leave well enough alone?
If you don't see anything, I'd say don't worry about it.
And what would be the things to look for? A weird black level? Wasn't there like shimmering on the screen or something? I'll
So
link
there's
to Mark's video on that. But
yeah. Link to their video on that. There's two separate types of effects. One is the line tilt or line time distortion,
mm-hmm.
where I think he was showing like the menu box in like Chrono Trigger, where there was a hard edge on the menu box, and it kind of smeared over to like the left.
That's right.
Right of
Yes.
it.
Yes.
That's a line. That's a line tilt, and then the field tilt is also in the Chrono Trigger. I noticed is when he was playing the cutscene at the beginning, where it had like the box of the video, and there's black everywhere, and at the very top of the screen, you see like this kind of. It kind of looks like when they try to make fake widescreen, when instead of black bars, they kind of put like the
Right.
third like version of stuff that's happening on the screen. There's
Yes.
kind of a little bit of that at the top. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll link back to the video, and I'll link to the exact time in the video where you could see that too. And then if people see that, or if they just want to be super anal about it, either add, I'll double check your email, but add the one higher capacitance to the cable that it could be used with both. Probably the 1000 or the 470. I think Mark was saying he put 470 in his, and it worked fine, but I'll put the exact link to that, and I'll even try to link to DigiKey for people that want to buy them. And if they want to do one cable per each, or for each system, so it's nothing in the PS1 cable and capacitors in the PS2, or did I get that backwards?
Yeah, that's backwards.
Okay. So it would be 220 in the PS1 cable.
220 or 470. 220 is the minimum you want to go.
Okay.
And yeah, nothing in the. That's why that board I gave you, that last one, has just jumper wires.
Right, I saw that.
And you could take those out and put whatever capacitors in there. It's just a socket. So it's like a custom.
Yeah, that's neat. I think I saw that. So that's just the straight up jumper if you wanted to go without anything at all.
Yeah, that if you do it like that, it's called well, it's not DC coupled because the caps are in the PlayStation. But so my reasoning behind 1000 is, in a worst case, let's say you have PS2. I think the older revisions have like 220 inside the board, and if you add them with 1000, it like equivalent's like 180. So you don't lose that much. And so I felt that was probably the best compromise. And I think they sell 1000 microfarads at the correct voltage that would work in like that type of application that would fit inside like maybe like a SCART connector or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They make them like small, I think.
So what happens with the opposite effect? So say you're mostly a PS2 user, so you get a Sync-on Luma cable, there's no capacitors in it at all, and then you use that on a PS1 with no capacitors in it. What's the downside to that? What would PS1 users see?
There's a lot that could happen. First of all, I don't know if the chip can drive a line like that.
It can. I have tested it.
It can? Okay. Then that's good. But another thing even if you could do it, there is a maximum or a pin current you could pull out of the pins of ICs, and you might be violating like a data sheet requirement. It might work, but
Right.
I don't know. What you're doing by putting a capacitor in there, you're doing something called AC coupling. You're removing the DC bias of the video signal instead of it floating somewhere. So these are all single supply circuits inside. So they range from 0 to 5 volts.
Hmm.
And at some point they set like a bias level so your video can swing around it. But if you just drive a video line like that, then you can have something that goes up to 4 volts just because your bias is high. You're driving way too much current that you don't really need to. So if you put a capacitor in line, it'll remove just the DC bias. You still get your signal, but that's why you put capacitors, but you need to put the correct value such that you form a filter with that capacitor and the 75 ohm resistor at the source and the 75 ohm resistor at the load. So equivalent 150
Hmm.
Ohm with a capacitor, and that needs to be a certain frequency. That's the whole theory behind it. I don't know. I probably can't everybody.
So whenever I talk about these things, so I worked on a project design team for a while, and I was the middleman. I was an expert at nothing, but I knew just enough to be able to kind of like speak the different languages. So I could, the software programmer that didn't like to talk to people, I could talk to him and then relay his info to the hardware guys.
I
And when
know
it came
what
down,
that's all about. Yeah.
and when it came time to actually ship product, I would always have to break things down into, because the electrical engineers, no offense to yourself, would not want to ship a product unless it was absolutely flawless. It's wrong.
Right.
This is wrong. We shouldn't do it. There's a
Yeah.
couple different types of wrong. There's wrong with absolutely zero ill effects, other than maybe it would be better than if we did it a different way. There's wrong as this product that could have lasted 20 years is now only going to last 15 or 16. And then there's wrong where you're going to damage your equipment. Maybe
Right.
it's a week, maybe it's a month, but it will be damaged at some point. So by running it PlayStation 1 without the capacitors, or really any console that requires resistors and caps in it, by removing those caps, what level are we looking at? Is it going to be, will it eventually harm your consoles, or like is it just no big deal?
That's a great way to phrase the question too. But yeah, it's not. See, I don't know. It depends on the thing that's driving the video line.
Hmm.
So it's not universal across all the consoles. And I would say, in general, though, if I had to generalize, you're probably at the middle level. You probably won't damage something, and you probably won't see any ill effects.
Hmm.
But the thing is, they weren't designed to do this. Like,
Right.
there's a reason why they put the caps in. And so you'd be using it in a way it wasn't designed. So there's a possibility you could mess something up. I wouldn't recommend it. Like you said, it could be. I think there was a guy who did a SNES component video mod, and he was just driving stuff out of these pins that were just meant to go right back into the
Hmm.
IC. But they were using them to drive a video line. I think I could be wrong on this, but I might be remembering it wrong. But didn't that like bust up some video chips that because they were pulling too much current out of those pins?
Yeah, I think so, and I think every time I've seen it do damage, and any time I've damaged anything, it's damaged the console itself. I've never
Right.
damaged a monitor from it.
Oh
Or
no, this wouldn't damage a monitor.
right, so it's
Yes.
I guess that was the other question too, because there's been a few scenarios where for doing a demo or testing something, I had to run something this way.
Okay.
When we did the demo, when I had that one SNES outputting RGB, S-video, and composite at the same
Yeah.
time, I ended up just running 2 RGB lines off the same chip, blew the chip out. So it was one of those things where it was for a demo, it's totally fine. Don't mind that I wasted the SNES
Yeah.
because a lot of people got to see it. But as long as it's console end and not, no one's going to ruin their FrameMeister or ruin their TV, then it's a little different.
No, it shouldn't ruin. It's very unlikely it would ruin the monitor or the sync device, the load device. I
Okay.
have to have a really small sized load resistor like 402, like super tiny microscopic that has like no wattage in it, and you
Mm.
dump like 4 volts into this thing, and then it would dry up. That's very unlikely to have big resistors on there for this reason, to be safe. Uh,
Gotcha.
but yeah, it's more on the console end because you don't want to pull too much current out of these driver chips.
Hmm.
And by AC coupling it, you reduce the amount of average current that's going through. And so it's a hard question to answer. I'm sorry I'm rambling
No, no,
about.
that's cool. This is interesting, and if I'm glad you answered it like that. But yeah, that's cool. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, I sent you a link to something Tim Worthington had posted on Shmups about sync signals and sync strippers. So I guess I need to kind of rewrite my sync page a little bit, well, the sync stripper page, because the way I've always looked at using something like this is there's two reasons one would use it. You have a perfectly fine signal, everything's exactly the way you want, there's no distortion, but something in your chain requires pure C-sync without anything else on the line. So you just stick a quick sync stripper in the SCART head and you're done. It's not, maybe it's not perfectly the best electrical signal, maybe it's not, flawless to spec, but it won't hurt anything, either console side or TV, and it solves your compatibility problem, end of story. Then the other side of it is people that are actually getting distortion on the lines. There was lots of N64 with that checkerboard pattern I've seen online. And that is where I would create the sync stripper circuit as close to the video chip as possible.
Right.
So I would take, Luma right off the chip into this with the correct circuit and then run the wire out to the multi-out and then be done. So I guess my question would be, when Tim was saying about building a different type of circuit around the LM1881, when does that matter in both or either? And once again, just to the electrical engineer thing, yes, there might be the right way to do it, but in the SCART end, I don't think that matters. Let me know if it does. But can you kind of shine some light on that and maybe explain a little bit about what he was talking about?
Yeah. I'll try my best. So the one thing I noticed in that like little write up that he wrote is that he was assuming that you're using a proper 75 ohm cable impedance,
Mm-hmm.
which unless you have that multi-core upgrade from Retro Console Accessories, most cheap SCART cables
Mm-hmm.
are not impedance related. They have no defined cable impedance, and so they're just wires in a bundle.
Right.
And so by default, the official like cores that the company makes the console uses, they use shielded 75 ohm impedance cables, and with the proper shielding. So in general, when you use that, you don't get those checkerboard effects.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole reason you get that type of noise is that the composite video has color in it, and the color is like this sine wave that's really like this goofy pattern that's not correlated to like any of the brightness changes of normal video. And so that magnetically couples in the neighboring wires, your RGB wires and your audio, and you get the hum,
Mm-hmm.
and you get this, your RGB gets distorted. But that happens, this is what Tim was saying, that only happens if there's enough current through that line to create a big enough magnetic field to induce into the neighboring wires.
Mm-hmm.
So the normal way people hook up the sync stripper at the SCART end, is they don't put a 75 ohm resistor to ground, and so you don't get large currents going through. You get very small currents. But what Tim was saying is if you don't, so you don't put the resistor, okay, that solves the problem of the high current going through the line, inducing into your neighboring lines.
Mm-hmm.
But it causes the problem that you're running you have the wrong load resistor on your video line. But then that's assuming you're using a 75 ohm impedance line, and you're not anyway. So
basically, he was talking in details and semantics. So if you're using your basic cable, RGB SCART cable, that's just pin to pin. There's nothing in it other than, of course, the capacitor and resistor depending on the cable. But it's not like you're going to get a performance difference or you're not going to get noise on the line by adding it without the 75 ohm resistor to ground. It's
Might
just,
I mean you have to do some testing because having no load resistor is probably going to get you worse. He was talking about reflections.
Mhm.
Like if there's no load resistor, then like some of the signal reflects back and mixes with the signal that's coming in, and so you get like some of these. Maybe your sync pulse might like dip down a little bit and then dip down more because it's adding with the reflection. So
Hmm.
you might still get stuff, but you might not need to put a 75. I don't know. It's because you're not using the right impedance. It's a hard question
Hmm.
to answer, but
Yeah, I'll pass all this info on to the guy that I know is now going to be making the sync and SCART boards for that. Hopefully he'll
yeah,
be able to tweak them. I'm not selling any more parts for this exact reason. Like every time I make something, because I'm not an electrical engineer, so I'll test a circuit, it'll work great. People will ask me to make them so I can sell them. I'll make 50 of them, and then I sell 40 and realize there might have been a slightly better way of doing it. And now
yeah,
what do? Do I email everybody and say, hey, it's probably perfect, but so it just I don't want to be part of that. I want to be the guy that talks about it and writes about it. So,
yeah. I get it. Yeah, it's hard.
but
It's
when
hard.
you're installing a sync stripper on the inside of a console, then so there's a lot of different
Yeah,
scenarios. One of which I'm going to
that
ask you next, but you
that makes
really
more sense.
definitely want to do
Because
it on the inside, and you want to do it 75 ohm to ground to make sure that there's nothing else on there.
I don't, you wouldn't need the 75 on the ground though, because your wire is this long. It's very short.
Oh, so the basic sync stripper signal, I'm sorry, diagram and schematic that I've posted, everybody posts, that's actually okay then for inside the console because there's really, there's less than an inch on a wire at that point.
The only thing I would worry about is violating the maximum voltage you could put on that pin for input.
Hmm.
If you have like a 2 volt signal and it's only rated for like 1.5 volts, if you had a 75 ohm, your voltage divider you're cutting in half down to 1, then you're okay. But if you don't put the 75 ohm and you still have 2 volts going into that pin, you could violate that data sheet requirement.
So
And
then you'd have 2 volts going down the sync pin all the way down the cable rather than one. Is that right?
well, we were talking about inside the
Yeah,
console.
inside. So now, but you have the sync stripper inside the console, and then you put the output of the sync stripper onto the multi-out, which you're talking wires that are less than a few inches each side.
Oh,
So
you're talking about that end of the sinks.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So what Tim was showing in his circuit was typically if you're driving a SCART interface,
Hmm.
they they expect video signal levels. If you just drove the output of the that LM1881 directly to a SCART device, you're kind of violating the SCART spec because
Well, I
that's
think to be specific, though, I think the majority of people, and people in England are probably going to email me and tell me I'm an idiot for saying this, but I still think the majority of the people that are using these things are on RGB monitors and processors now. I think it's very few that are actually on a SCART TV because even lots of flat screens now in Europe that still have a SCART input, you're still going to mostly want to upscale that. So, but I'm pulling up I'm pulling up the diagram now. So basically, on the output line, yeah, it is directly out. There is nothing on that.
so yeah, so that's a logic level. That's a TTL level. It could swing anywhere between 0 and 2.5 volts, anywhere 0 to 5 volts. And the SCART interface, if you abide by the standard, and then it's at the video end after it's terminated at 75, you should have 300 millivolts,
Hmm.
0.3 volts. And so that's why in Tim's diagram he has that 470 ohm series resistor out of
Gotcha.
it.
Huh. All right.
So he's voltage dividing down the logic level to video down
All
to
right.
levels. That's what the output is.
So then, just that basic signal that has the LM1881's output directly to like the multi-out sync pin, um, that still is okay then, as long as it's all inside the console and there's not long wires creating any kind of noise.
if the receiving device you're hooking it into can accept that high of a swing on the input pin.
Well, every scenario that I've tried does. So all the RGB
Okay.
monitors, all the processors. So at that point, it's not like you're not sending too high of a voltage to those because they all have some kind of voltage protection anyway in there, right?
Right. Right.
Because I mean, we're not talking about accidentally sending 12 volts through. We're talking about within levels of 1 volt. So
Well, it would be like 5 volts.
right, yeah, I guess, yeah.
Um,
I'm gonna put that on a multimeter and test it again now just to make sure. 'Cause-
it depends. I mean, if you're just talking about specs in the SCART standard, you're violating the standard. But in practical use, it might not matter depending on your equipment.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, since we're already talking about sync, I might as well bring up the Nomad issues that I've had.
Oh yeah, the
So
Nomad.
it's pretty funny too because my buddy Justin, I got a package in the mail from him. I open it up and there's a Nomad. I said, "What's this for?" He goes, "Mod it." Mod it for what? He goes, "I don't know, but I guarantee you, if you give you a week, you'll find something to do." I'm like, all right, fine, that's fair. And then a couple days later, I happened to be at like a Retro Games Plus trade up thing, and I ended up buying my own, so I had two to test with. So now I had two. Their serial numbers are pretty far off too, so I had at least two different revisions that I could start testing. And I sent you a video on the different tests I did. I don't really want to go into that because a lot of the stuff I did probably wouldn't make sense unless you were. I mean, you're going to get it, but unless people were there and heard the whole story. But I guess to sum it up, there are some scenarios where you plug in an RGB SCART cable into a Nomad, plug it into a display, works fine. Other times, the signal goes nuts. So I went by my default and thinking, well, if the problem's sync, let's cut the sync line and then use Luma, and that worked perfect. But I really want to know why. And I guess more importantly, if it's a 20-page explanation as to why this happens, and one of these star and sun and moon has to align scenarios, I don't want to put that right up on the website because I don't think anybody would really want to get into that detail. But I'm still just baffled as to how that could be. And I thought maybe at the very least it was the 75 ohm resistance that's sometimes required on the line. So like if you've seen RGB monitors that have the in and out, some of them need that cap on the other side. So I tried adding that and it didn't make any difference. But some scenarios it just worked perfect. So I don't get it. Do you have any idea on why you think that could be? And
Yeah, so I investigated this like back when My Life in Gaming did their Genesis video, and they heard reports about this Nomad problem. And I don't tell them, but I ended up staying up super late that night to investigate for them. And I kind of found out what was going on. Um, and it has to do with kind of this whole sync, C-sync, and loading stuff down with resistors. I sent you a diagram. It's like an MS Paint drawing of me thinking.
yeah, I saw that. That was cool. So
Uh,
is it because the LCD screen on the Nomad's console itself is also pulling a RGB video, and so you're technically having two sources draw from the same, or two displays draw from the same source?
You do, but it's not really the RGB lines directly. It's the sync. So you have this sync line that is feeding the LCD controller encoder thing and the video encoder for the output, and then also the output itself. And so if you put a 75 ohm resistor to ground, which is what you do when you plug into a SCART interface or a monitor, you're loading down that sync line, and so you're pulling the voltage way down on that line. Normally, that's fine for the video encoder to still catch sync, but what I think is happening, and this is just the theory, is that that line though, the one that sync line is pulled down, doesn't affect the video encoder, but it's affecting the LCD controller, the controller for the LCD, and I think the LCD is using that sync signal to do like some sort of clamping operation where it's restoring the DC level, and if you load it down too much, it's not working right. Then it's injecting problems back into the RGB that's still feeding the video encoder. And so I would take, all I did was take the Nomad output and I was putting different size resistors to ground, and I don't remember. This was like in October, August or something, and there was some point where it was enough voltage drop to cause the effect to happen.
So that's why when I plugged it into the sync strike, it didn't put a load on it because it was taking the sync signal and manipulating it and sending it out, without.
I don't know what the equivalent circuit of the sync strike
It's
is.
pretty much just an LM1881. I don't know if they do.
There's probably no termination on the input. If there's termination on input, you get the same problem.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So obviously now the easiest solution would be to just use an RGB SCART cable that gets sync from composite video.
Yeah.
But
good ones are expensive
and that always add other issues and everything else. Doing what I did of cutting and adding Luma, it seemed to work perfect. The only issue with that is if you have anything that requires C-Sync, Luma's not going to be compatible, so you'd actually have to put the sync stripper inside, just like we were just talking about,
Right.
And that would definitely work. But I was just wondering if if there's if people were really into this and they had a Nomad and they just really wanted it, they didn't want to mod their Nomad, but they wanted the best possible output, do they just buy a sync strike? Is there a way to add a different component inside the cable, or is it just...
You might be able to add a resistor in series with that to cause the voltage drop to happen more on the side that you're connecting to externally and less to happen on the inside of the Nomad.
Now, did this happen with your cables? Did you try your cables on a Nomad to see what happened?
So this is what confused me when they first told me, because I've used the Nomad. I go into like stores and test TVs with the Nomad. Got kicked out before.
That's awesome.
And I was using my old prototype, which used C-Sync as the source, and I never had any problems. Never had any issues.
Interesting.
My cable is not a SCART device though. It doesn't act like a normal SCART device.
Right.
Because I'm not driving full video lines, and so I use that trickery to make everything work. But so that's why I was confused why it wasn't working, and so that's what made me investigate that. And I noticed every time I loaded down the line enough, you'd get the goofy effect.
Interesting. All right. Well, that's pretty cool. I don't know. I remember getting a Nomad whenever consoles go through their cycles, right? Like for Xbox One, or the original Xboxes now I can get for like $10 a piece, and I'm sure a couple of years from now they're going to go back up in price and be vintage. And when the Nomads hit that, I think I ended up getting one for like $30 on eBay or something, and I loved it.
Awesome.
And then I ended up, when I needed cash, sold it for like $100 or something. But I'm happy to get one and play with it, but I think I'm going to keep the cut Luma mod in mind just so I don't ever have to worry about this. It's just not something I have to deal with. But,
yeah, I mean, I could try looking into seeing what resistor would work in that situation to allow the LCD thing to function properly and give you enough voltage on your sync to go out to your other device.
Cool.
You could probably figure that out.
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna mess with it, to be honest, and see what happens. Then I'll email you and tell me if I did anything wrong.
Okay. No, I think based on the data I have on the thing, I could probably calculate something you could start at.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool.
Around from there. Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to ask you is something that's been absolutely driving me insane, and you've helped me a ton with this. We've exchanged a million emails.
I know what you're talking about.
Sega Master System.
Oh God.
Oh, it's been such a nightmare. I love that old system. When my neighbor wanted a Genesis, he was like a born salesman, and he convinced little me to buy his Master System so he can get enough money. And I brought it home. Then he just made it seem like it was the greatest system on the planet. And I bought that and his Atari. And I think I used the Atari once and was like, ugh. And then I just loved the Master System. I had Space Harrier 3D and a couple of just like arcade games that actually felt like arcade games. Some of the NES ports at the time weren't really good. And so I always have like this, this strange affinity for the Master System. I always loved playing it. And then once I discovered the FM sound games, that blew my mind all over again. And so I guess the inherent problem, to sum it up for the listeners, is I could take a Genesis and get perfect signal out of it. So sometimes there's ways of manipulating the Sony encoder that's already on it, so there's no jail bars. My preferred method is usually just to do a bypass because I'd rather rely on brand new components, not 30-year-old components. That's still up for debate on whether that's right or wrong. But no matter what I've tried, there's no Master System signal that I've ever gotten to be flawless. So it's been a tremendous improvement. The stock outputs, and I'll put links to pictures, and I think I still have some up on my website now, but the stock output of a Master System RGB is just horrendously bad. If you're using an RGB monitor, maybe it's passable, but if you're using an upscaler or a capture card, you're seeing all of the horribleness. And it is harder to fix on a Master System, but doing the RGB bypass, especially when I did it with a completely different connector. So I didn't even have to cut anything on the motherboard, just took RGBS from the chip, put it through an amp out to a different multi-out. It was a massive, massive improvement. But then there was still a little bit left, and it wasn't enough. I guess the best way to put it is the few people that I know that have done this RGB bypass to theirs have all emailed me and said, thanks for sending me the board. This is awesome. I love it. It's perfect. But there's enough there where I was just curious why. So I emailed Tim, I emailed you, and Tim came back with a fix on his PAL Master System.
Right.
Basically said, this is fine. It's perfect. Check this out. And it just obviously, it's a different board revision, so I didn't try it on mine. And that's when you and I get to talking. We tried a few things. I tried lifting all of the pins off the board, to the point where there's nothing, I even snipped the lines, the pins on the board, on the chip itself, so they're really short, so there's not creating any kind of interference. And
Yeah,
then
we were doing like high-speed gigahertz RF stuff.
Oh, yeah. Then, soldered the lines to each one, and each one is to ground. So the actual video line is like a millimeter long, and then the grounds are all tied down. So just to make sure there was no possible, interference at all, nothing, and it didn't do anything. There was one where when I lifted all the pins, and then you had a suggestion of doing something, there was a small improvement over just doing a bypass, but it wasn't enough that I would recommend anybody other than crazy people like me to do. But
I think what we did is we lifted the two pins to connect the signal for the clock, because that clock frequency is the same frequency as the color subcarrier for the consoles, and that's where you get your jail bars from, is that frequency. And so we shield grounded it, lifted the pin, went to the other pin, because that's the only place it really needs to go between the CPU and the VPU.
Right.
And still, it didn't do anything. I think my theory, and I told you this, and I might be true, I don't know for sure, is that the coupling of the noise is happening in that chip.
So I've also seen on Genesis consoles that I've done the RGB bypass to, where I always use Sonic 2 because the title screen, it's so crystal clear and there's so much blue, it's easy to see any interference. You'll put Sonic 2 in, even using an EverDrive, the same ROM card, so it's not the ROM card creating interference. Sonic 2 looks perfect. You load up a Master System game, and there's something there. You could see it with a capture card, but not really anything else.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that.
And it's not enough where I would go hunting down a fix, but it's enough for me to think, is the problem in the inherent chip itself, the way the Master System works, or is it
So this is with a power base converter?
No, this is an EverDrive, a Mega EverDrive. So it runs both Master System and Genesis consoles. And it's just, you take a screenshot of the Sonic 2, which has that big blue opening, and you zoom in and you see zero interference at all. And you take a screenshot of Hang On, which has, it's a different shade of blue, but it's still, a blue background. And you'll occasionally see something. Not a lot, only if you zoom in and only if you're really looking just for testing purposes. And it kind of baffled me as to why, because it's going through the same exact chips, I think at least, right?
It's going through the same chips. The thing I could think of is that I don't know how Genesis operates in Master System mode. It could turn on a clock signal that it needs to run the Master System games, which is that 3.58 megahertz. And now that that's there, causing more noise, it could be because of that. And normally when you're running Genesis games, maybe it doesn't generate that clock signal, but when you're running Master System, normally you do it through the power base, and it's going through it's got to hit the cartridge, right? It's
Right, yeah.
data signals from the cartridge. I think that also gets a clock signal too, and it probably needs that same CPU clock. I don't know. I'm guessing here.
Yeah, it's a good guess. And just to reiterate for anybody listening, it's Master System games on Genesis are awesome. It's perfect. So what I'm talking about is simply for testing purposes, just to try to hunt down the Master System problem. Maybe I'll test through the Genesis to see. And for anybody using it, you don't have nothing to worry about. But
I think that's the key, that the CPU clock frequency for Master System is the same for the NTSC color encoding. And that's what jail bars are. They're the sine wave at that frequency getting coupled into your other video lines. And the reason why Tim didn't have his problem is that on the PAL system, they output a separate pin. Even though the CPU clock frequency is still 3.58, they can't use that for PAL color encoding. So they output the 4.43 megahertz PAL frequency out a different pin that goes to the video encoder and stuff. And so when he was fixing his up, he was, making sure that frequency wasn't getting into stuff. I don't know if the other frequency was still, or he said it looked fine, so I don't know.
Well, that's really interesting, and thank you for explaining that, because that's a good theory. And the only other thing that I think you explained to me once, but I forgot what you'd said, was I have Hang-On, the Hang-On Safari Hunt cartridge, and I also have the card, the Sega card of Hang-On, the ones that kind of look like the TurboGrafx 16 cards.
Yeah.
And on a monitor, it's identical, but when I'm using my capture card, if I use one of them, there's a black border, and if I use the other one, there's a blue border. Wait, is it outputting at a different resolution? Do you remember that at all?
I do. I don't remember you saying that it was dependent on the device you were connecting it to. I thought it was dependent on the card version or the...
Exactly, cart versus card.
Right.
Slightly different through my capture card. So
Okay.
why didn't you figure out why that was?
I think it might have been related to when I was doing research for the cable project. I wrote software for all the consoles we were targeting, and I wrote Sega Master System software, and I would run in the emulator, and it'd be exactly what I wanted. I got this color bar pattern, black border around, so it's easy to hit on the oscilloscope, and then I would burn it to the EverDrive, pop it in, and there's like a blue border around everything. I'm like, that wasn't on the emulator. And then I found out that there was some bit in a register in this VPU that sets the border color. And I have a feeling that just that one ROM has the border color set to a different color than the other ROM. They're not the identical ROMs on there. And that's what I think is going on. It just has the different border set. And took me so long to find that piece of information. It was online somewhere, but I had to dig for it. It was not easy Google search or anything. I was looking at pages that detailed the whole VPU register set and going through all those. And there was a brief mention about border color. And I'm like, oh, I'll try this. Still looked the same on the emulator, but when I popped it onto the thing, it was black. It's what I want.
So inherently then, it's not because it was a card versus cart. It just so happens that they set the border color different when programming the ROM
I think the ROMs are different. That's my guess, because then the ROM could set the different bits for that.
That would make sense, because I'm probably wrong. I'm sure somebody from SMS Power is going to email me and call me an idiot. But as far as I know, Hang-On was released separately as a card, but as a cart, it was always bundled with Safari Hunt.
Okay.
I think. So you would have to be a different ROM anyway, because from Sega itself, it would have been two separate files. So
Safari Hunt, is that one that also was in the built into the console?
No, that was maybe it might have been. I never tested that. I never tested an SMS that had a game built in.
Okay.
But yeah, so that would make sense. That would make total sense then. All right, well that's interesting. And if anybody wants to get the perfect output of their SMS, I'm still working on it. I've been promoting the Genesis RGB bypass because I've gotten it to work perfect, exactly the way I wanted. I haven't really promoted the SMS yet because I needed to iron out these little kinks. But the guy Voltar, I don't know his real name, and it's always so weird to call people by their online screen names. But the guy Voltar, who's been on the forums for a while, good dude, posts great work. He says he had a cool jail bar fix that helps tremendously. So I'll test that. I'm always going to be
Cool.
testing the bypasses, and I'll update everybody. But there's, you could still make your master system look awesome. But if you really want the best quality, as far as I know, as of today, you got to use the Genesis to get it. So. Well, I did have a question about your cables too. So I don't want to get too detailed into this because I'm going to be doing an episode either next week or the week after. But I was doing a comparison of different upscalers, so the XRGB Mini and the open source scan converter. And I kind of decided, everybody's got their niche. So Futta has his detailed reviews of all these upscalers that are awesome. And then you got Wolf from Firebrand X.
Yeah, I know Wolf. I talked to him.
Yeah, he does. I mean, he could just detect the slightest bit of scaling, anomalies, anything. He's got his thing. So I figured, why don't I just stick to what I'm good at? And I tested lag on everything, and then I kind of just the overall feel of it. And I did your cables versus the XRGB Mini, which Wes at Second Opinion Games actually lent me his, so thanks for letting me the Mini for that. But and then the open source scan converter, which I bought, which I love that so far. And I did the lag test, so I had the signal split, used the G-SCART switch to have two outputs. I had it going to an RGB monitor, and then I had it going to my my high-def Sony BVM monitor. So that way I could take the 720p output of the upscaler and put it into that. So first I tested your cables just to try it, which I know it was dumb because there's not going to be any lag between it, but for anybody that was curious, there was no lag. And then I tested it through a VGA, so a HDMI to VGA and an HDMI to SDI converter, which I thought was neat because both of those didn't have any lag at all either, which is cool for SDI. So anybody that has a high-end BVM, you could put a 720p HDMI signal into it, which I thought was neat. So the lag tests were pretty cool. And then after that, I kind of said, all right, well, let's see a basic feel on a TV. So I have a really nice Panasonic Plasma. One of my buddies got me a crazy deal on it when they first came out. So it's professionally calibrated. It's a 1080p set, 50-inch, and that has, all the inputs. And then I have a total piece of junk 4K TV I bought just because it was cheaper than a 1080p TV. It was the Seiki, and it's garbage, but it's 4K, so at least, you don't have to worry about anything being off. And I tested the devices on each. And the Seiki TV obviously was terrible, but the one thing that I noticed the biggest difference of is when I put your cables, so a SNES through your cable into the component input, it actually detected it as if it was 480i. And I got a cool slow-mo video I took with my iPhone where you could actually see like the text on the screen wiggling back and forth as if it was a shaky interlaced. And it stretched it top to bottom, and it had terrible lag because the TV's bad. And it looked awful. And then I went into my living room and I tested it on the good TV, and it looked phenomenal. So the aspect ratio was even correct. It wasn't stretched all the way top to bottom. There was enough space on it. And then it detected it as if it was a progressive scan image. So there was no shakiness to it.
Oh, wow.
And it looked exactly like the open source scan converter in 480p mode. Sadly, that TV doesn't accept the 720p mode of the OSSC, but there was no difference, pretty much. I got pictures, and I didn't expect to see too much because you're talking 240p versus 480p on a 1080p set. So, but they performed absolutely perfect. I loved it. So the question I have is, how are you going to know if your TV can accept a 240p signal and have it use it correctly? So that's the thing, because your average person, hey, I love Super Nintendo, got a really great TV, want to play my 4 favorite games, and that's it. They're not going to buy a FrameMeister. They're not going to buy the OSSC. They're sure as hell not going to buy one of my setups with the G-SCART and an Extron, and So your cables are perfect for that, as long as you don't have a shitty TV.
Yeah.
So
the way we've been handling that is we have this test procedure on our website where if you already have the console you want to use and the composite cable, you can trick the TV into thinking it's doing component
Oh,
uh, by hooking the composite into the Luma channel, and it should process the signal the same way as if
that's
you
awesome.
were. That's how we've been, and we actually we let our backers know multiple times, please, test your stuff in case there's an issue and you don't want us to ship you anything. Uh, and most of them did, and so far the results are really good. But
So for the component video input, which color, just to simplify it for people that are just looking at the back of the TV, which color would you plug composite into?
so it's a little. There's a couple different scenarios. On the website I kind of separate into two different ones where you have a TV that has separate component and composite video jacks.
Hmm.
Um,
And most don't nowadays. Most new TVs just
most
have a
most
component.
most TVs now have a shared jack.
Oh yeah,
Shared,
that's right.
where it's sometimes they color it half yellow, half green, or like a green circle inside a bigger yellow circle, but they say Y/video.
Okay.
And so with those, it's a little more complicated. Most ways for them to detect what's the user put into there is first they have a switch in the Y/video. You plug something in there, the switch opens up, and the TV knows I can select the AV input.
Hmm.
And then it thinks you have component if you plug in the it's usually PB. I've seen it. As long as you plug something, it could be disconnected on the other end.
Hmm.
Plug in PB, that switch opens up, and then the TV's like, oh, so this guy plugged component in. I'm gonna unlock component in my input selection list. And so for that situation, what we told people is to do exactly that. Plug composite into the shared jack, and then plug two dummy cables into the other ones. Select component, and you should get this really messy black and white image. But you can see if it processes it correctly, if you even get a signal.
Right.
Uh,
I'm gonna
that,
try that too. And I did like a mini review of your cables, but I didn't want to post it till they're available to the public. So as soon as they are, I'll be able to just do that. But that's cool. I'm gonna make sure to add that. I'll do a video on it before too, because that is the solution. Then just take your SNES with your composite cable, plug it into green, assuming that yours doesn't have the dual inputs on it, and
right.
then see how it processes it. And I'll put my slow-mo video up too. You do not need to be a tech nerd. It is a very blatant difference. The picture either looks perfect, or I was testing it with the 240p test suite. So the actual, you see the words 240p test suite. The 2 was doing this in the slow-mo video. Yeah, because it was doing that shaky, weird interlaced thing. So,
Okay.
but yeah, so it was so that's a great answer. That's cool. Do you guys have a release date to the public for those yet?
Um, well, we're
June,
as soon
July,
as possible.
August?
Yeah, we're trying for end of June. When we tested a bunch of cables for Kickstarter backers, there were some issues we found, and we relayed those issues back to the factory, and they went back to check the rest of the production counts, the remaining units of that production run, and check for those issues that we found. And so that took a little while. But it's not only that, we were trying to set up a store shop, and that's not too trivial.
No.
So
All right. Well, I'll post as soon as they're available, but I guess this summer is a safe bet then. So.
I think so. Yeah.
And so what's the switch that's on the SNES cables? There's a brightness switch you have on there, right?
Right. So when I first tested everything to make the circuit, I mean, I have this spreadsheets of all these console revisions, and I measured using the test software I wrote for SNES, and the other ones, Genesis, Master System. I have this giant spreadsheet values, and I use those to to calculate like optimal circuit values to give the right gain, right brightness, contrast on most of the consoles, and I kind of narrowed them down into like two like batches. So I guess I call them like older SNESs and newer SNESs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the brightness switch is to adjust for brightness between these two like kind of groups of consoles. There's SNESs that are too bright.
Right,
Um,
so the one chip consoles and the mini are known to be brighter than the
right,
rest, so that's why you would flip the switch, and then if you have like one of the, especially the earlier revisions, you would want the brighter one for it to look better.
exactly. And
Oh,
it's for Super Nintendo, it's not that big of a discrepancy. We mainly have the Switch for Genesis because older Master Systems are very weak. Um,
yes, yes.
so and we're using the same cable for Master System and like all the Genesis stuff, and so um, that setting like is a very big difference. That switch setting, and
So
so we
your
want
cables handle all those crazy Master System revisions, and even what about the MK2000, the Japanese one? Does it still
should work on.
those? Because I get so many emails, and it got to the point where, I just started telling people, look, if your Master System, if you love it and you want to use it, like really think about either doing a bypass or wiring up a second output connector, like use a VGA style jack and just put the right components in, because the reports I was getting from people, like it started to the point, yeah, started to be at the point where I almost wasn't believing because it seemed ridiculous, but the signal was so weak. And then people would put amplifiers in the cable, but that would cause noise and other things. And it was just so. I guess with the circuit that you guys have on that, it should work with all of them. Then.
You should we optimize them into two camps again on the Genesis, where um, mainly older Master Systems and everything else. Um, and so yeah, the older Master Systems you should put it on the brighter setting, and you should get a way better um, output. And I mean, it won't fix jail bars or anything like that, but the
And yeah, it's inherent on the console. But yeah, I've tried your SNES cables, but I haven't gotten my hands on the Genesis ones yet. I want to order those anyway when they come out, but I really want to try that. And I mean, it'd be pretty funny if the best solution was just to get your cable and use that in an RGB monitor, where you can just keep them.
yeah, right. Like I know when I sent My Life in Gaming guide, I sent Corey the Genesis one, and he loved that brightness switch for Master System because his Master System was one of the dark ones. And he's like, "Do you know how I could get that on my SCART cable for it?" And he's like, "Somebody told him to remove a resistor," and I told him, "Be careful because there was
Yeah.
that same problem
Yes.
of drawing too much current from the pin,
Right.
and so you might not want to do that." So
Yeah. Yeah. And they still have the audio cable or audio jack on it as well, right? The Genesis cables.
yes, they have
So
that.
this is cool. Both. So for any Master System nerds already gonna know what I'm talking about. Everybody else is probably gonna be like, well, who cares? But the original Genesis, obviously, if you want stereo sound, you use the headphone jack in front. So that's why you would have it on that. But anybody that gets the ROM carts that have the FM sound chip in them, it requires you to run the output sound of the SMS into this ROM cart, and then the output sound of the ROM cart to your TV. So you could just get an RCA to 3.5 millimeter jack cable, so people could still take advantage of the FM sound ROM carts with that as well. So,
Yeah, you could put you could put whatever you want into there. If you
yeah.
want to pipe in some, I don't know, some Radiohead or something into your Genesis game, you could like what
Yeah.
we were doing to test the jacks is just MP3 player with a guy saying left channel, right channel, left channel, right channel. Uh,
That would have driven
and
me
it
nuts
drove
after about 10
yeah, it
seconds.
drove Nick nuts because he was testing the Genesis cable. Uh, but yeah, you could pipe whatever you want in there. So yeah, that for the FM sound thing on the Master System.
Yeah, that's cool.
Um, yeah, that was a feature I really wanted to get in there because a lot of people asked us to do it. It's very hard to fit stuff in that small of a space.
Yeah,
It used to be a 2.5 millimeter jack because that's all I could fit, and our manufacturer to do the proper overmolding, they first made me shift the board up a little bit for the switch. And when they did that, I saw if I could put a 3.5 in. I'm like, still can't. And then when they asked me to put the jack down a bit, I did that, and I'm like, I'd be able to fit a 3.5.
yeah,
Yeah,
2.5 would have worked fine, but 3.5 is just so much easier because everybody's got a 3.5 millimeter cable,
Right.
standard
It's
headphone.
probably just sitting around. Like they don't have to buy a special one. I mean
Yeah,
that.
it's not like they go obsolete. If you had one back in the '90s that came with the Genesis or something, or the Sega CD, you could just use that. You don't have to worry
Yeah.
about it. So,
It's just the same on each end, and yeah, it's a cool feature. I would use it if I hooked up my Genesis one.
anything else that you guys get coming up? Anything else you guys wanted to mention that's next on the horizon, or just sticking with the cables for now and then kind of dealing with that as it comes?
I mean, I've all the whole vision of the company is to be able to do a full solution for HD TVs and future, right? 4Ks, 10Ks, 12Ks, like you said in a previous video. And so, like, really, the component cables are like one half of that. I really want to make the other end, which is, kind of our own um, video processor deinterlacer solution. And I kind of want to make it scalable where, because there's these people that email us like, when are you going to release the HDMIzer? That's the thing I'm talking about because I gave it this goofy name. Uh, and there's guys that are like, I just need it because I just need to get stuff to work. And then these guys are like, dude, man, you should put this, 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 this in it. And I'm like, oh man, that's going to be expensive.
Yeah.
And so we might do something where we either scale our basic architecture up and down to maybe other things in the future. I really want to start get to work on that, but I got to quit my day job. I got to. There's so this stuff takes so much time.
Yes, it does.
And
Yeah, I think there's a big market for that and a big hole in the market because you get the FrameMeister, which has been the default standard. You get the open source scan converter, which is only
yeah,
about $200, it's great and it's got a ton of potential, but it's still $200, and neither of them can be optimized for 4K TVs just perfectly.
yeah.
And then there is nothing under $200 that I would even waste my time on. The lag is just too awful. It looks pretty, but the lag is terrible.
I mean, our goal for like a base version of this would be under $100. Like
Yeah, and that's a target, price as well.
that's what we want to hit. I think we can hit that. We just need more engineering time.
Yeah. So
But
I think an inexpensive, low lag version, even if it doesn't
yeah,
look as good with not as many fancy features, as long as because the open source scan converter is almost no lag at all, so
right.
that it's under a frame. So I mean, if it's something like that, awesome. And I think there's also, especially, if you just bought your crappy Seiki 4K TV like I did, nothing's gonna look good. But if I got a curved OLED 4K TV that I just spent $3,500 on, I'm not gonna mind spending $600 on a better upscaler for all my consoles.
Yeah.
And the FrameMeister and the OSSC are good, and they work. Wes and I were testing on his 4K TV, and they looked great. But you're still relying on the TV to do a lot of the work. And it didn't add much lag, but little zoom things, the way scan lines added up, it would have been really nice if we just had full control over that. So I think there's room for both, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to work on that stuff.
And any other revisions of the cables? I think you guys were talking about Dreamcast for a while now, right?
Yeah, so Dreamcast, I'd like to get to work on that too. The reason why is I think we can offer a pretty good solution with Dreamcast because we'll be able to switch between a 480i/240p mode and a 480p mode that's totally compliant with component video.
I was just about to say, because the Dreamcast 640 by 480 VGA, it kind of, even if you put it through a VGA to HDMI adapter, a lot of
Yeah.
TVs don't know how to handle the signal properly, so it gets a little weird.
Right. It's what it is. Dreamcast VGA is video timings with VGA sync patterns, and so if you use the video timings with video sync patterns through like a YPVPR interface, then you don't get that problem. So, that's something we think we could use a lot of the same tooling for. The problem is we're having trouble finding the raw connector in its raw form
Mm.
to be able to make these in the quantities. So that's one hurdle. I still want to do a first spin of prototypes because I've only breadboarded this before, and I'd like to spin up prototypes that are in like a cable assembly. So
Gotcha. So that's far off though, because you still got the rollout of the regular cables, the SNES and
yeah,
the Genesis. So,
yeah.
all right. Well, hey, I'm sure it's something everybody's looking forward to at some point. So, awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on and for dealing with all my my long and weird questions. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it though, especially some of the stuff that nobody's really gone into detail about and really nailed down the answers. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, like I said, I love talking about this stuff. I mean, if we had a whiteboard, we could like go over all sorts of crazy stuff.
Well, I'm sure in a couple more months after we've exchanged another million emails from other problems, I'll have you back on to explain all that stuff too. So, all
Okay, yeah, I'm down. So,
right, cool. Well, thanks a lot, man. I'll talk to you soon.
yeah, you too.